All right, so sometimes I see headlines that I really hope in the back of my mind are part of an Onion article or I'm being goofed and gagged in some way and they can't possibly be an accurate depiction of our current reality. But unfortunately, Alabama's GOP governor is working overtime to try to destroy whatever faith I have left in this country, as Alabama's GOP governor has signed bills to use COVID-19 relief funds to build prisons. Using COVID relief funds that are supposed to be somewhat designated towards tackling COVID and the pandemic. She is using these to build prisons. Okay, so we're going to get into how ridiculous this is in terms of an overall picture. But first, let's just read some of the details. So Washington, D.C., Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed into law Friday a number of prison infrastructure bills that will use coronavirus relief funds to build new prisons in the state, calling it, quote, a pivotal moment for the trajectory of our state's criminal justice system. And Ivey, a Republican, had convened a special session of the Alabama legislature to discuss how to fix what she called a decades-long problem of prison infrastructure challenges. And the governor said Friday's bill signing was the culmination of hard work and conversations between lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. And of course it is, because we know the police state and our mass incarceration in this country has always been a bipartisan issue. And they continue saying, quote, I'd like to personally offer my thanks to the legislative leadership who are standing behind me right here for a successful special session and what we believe will yield untold benefits to the Alabama. Untold benefits. Building prisons will yield untold benefits to the citizens of Alabama, according to this GOP governor. But they continue saying, earlier this week, Ivey defended her proposal to use the state's allotment of COVID-19 relief funds to build prisons after receiving criticisms from Democrats. And the proposal included using up to $400 million of federal COVID-19 relief money. So that's your money going to this. Up to $785 million in bonds and no more than $154 million from state general fund to add prisons and to renovate others. And the state legislature gave the package final approval on Friday. And finally, the federal rescue package was enacted to help states plug budget holes in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the Biden administration has issued broad guidance on how these funds can be used, including offsetting revenue losses to protect vital public services. And the administration has also encouraged state and local governments to use some of the funding to address a summer rise in violent crime. Again, this is this completely ridiculous view that not only the Biden administration, but also the entirety of the Republican Party across all of these state legislatures across the country, this idea that they have been trying to push that this rise in violent crime over the summer was somehow due to a lack of police or a lack of prisons in this country, instead of, the pandemic and the economic hardships that followed from that. When people's material conditions are impacted in such a way as they were during the COVID pandemic, you would expect a rise in violent crime because people are desperate, people are hard on their luck, they're not doing so well, right? So you would think this would be the time to invest in the American people, to send out more stimulus checks, to actually build a public health infrastructure that is affordable and accessible to every single American. But instead, they're choosing to double down on the police state. So just to give you a perspective on how ridiculous this view actually is. So the United States leads the world in incarceration. In fact, we lead the entire history of the world in incarceration. So here are global incarceration rates per 100,000 people. You see, one country kind of stands out a little bit on this map, doesn't it? That would be the United States of America, 700 per 100,000 people sitting behind bars in this country. The only other countries that are really comparable and of scale would be something like Russia, and even they are barely like 40% of what we are in this country. And in addition to this, we know the common statistics that are often brought up and are true. We have roughly 4% of the world's total population and roughly 25% of the world's total prison population. So we are imprisoning more than any country, any empire throughout all of human history. And it's no different today as we are right now. So you would think that they would be looking at this current situation and say, maybe, just maybe, we should not be adding more people to our broken and already overcrowded prison systems, which, by the way, have been causing millions of coronavirus cases. As you see here from NPR, crowded U.S. jails drove millions of COVID-19 cases, a new study says, and it's really not to be surprising, right? That shouldn't be surprising in any way, shape, or form. Of course they're going to do that. You have a bunch of people who you are putting in a very confined and compact area. You're going to be completely understaffed and under-resourced, right, in terms of giving them COVID precautions that are actually legitimate, right, because in many cases you can't because they are in confined conditions. And so, of course, this is going to be the inevitable result of that. And so, again, the priority should be the opposite of what the Alabama governor is doing. The priority should be releasing people from jails who don't need to be in jails, releasing people from prison who don't need to be in prison. Specifically, what Joe Biden could do in a unilateral way is pardon all nonviolent drug offenders. That's what he should be doing right now. But, of course, they're doing the exact opposite and stuffing as many people as they possibly can into the jails and prison systems across the United States, and especially in Alabama because of this governor's actions. And again, Biden does hold a certain degree of responsibility here because, again, he gave them broad broad ability to basically designate these funds to go wherever the fuck they want. And so, of course, a state like Alabama is going to end up using them for this. But just to give you a perspective on where we are at in COVID, okay? Not only do we have the highest incarceration rate, not only do we have more people sitting behind bars than any other country in human history, but we also have the highest COVID death toll. So on top of that, all right, the United States, you see here confirmed deaths, which this is obviously an undercount. I would estimate, it could be upwards between 800,000, 900,000 to a million, right? Obviously, we're not going to be completely counting all of these, but 700,000 deaths as of right now. We just hit this milestone, 700,000 dead Americans. Many of these were pretty much entirely preventable. We saw that study from a while back, which estimated, I think it was like roughly half of the COVID cases could have been prevented. The early COVID cases could have been prevented if we had some variation of a single payer system like a Medicare for all system. So it's because of our privatized, for-profit, completely broken and understaffed and under-resourced healthcare system that we have here in the United States that we end up with a result like this. And why do we have an under-resourced and an understaffed, an underprepared healthcare system here in the United States? Well, it's because we're dumping all of our fucking money into our military and police state, okay? That's why. I mean, that's really why, because you see what our priorities here in this country actually are. And it's not just Alabama, it's all of these other states as well. This happens in Democratic-led states. It's been happening in New York, where their prison conditions have been absolutely horrific under the leadership of Andrew Cuomo, who thankfully is gone, hopefully forever now. But I mean, this is a bipartisan issue, as we know. And just to give you a perspective on where Alabama is at in terms of the specifics of this state. So how many COVID-19 vaccines has Alabama administered? Well, they've barely administered 42% of Alabama's population being fully vaccinated. So they are not even at a majority of their population fully vaccinated. And instead of investing in solving this problem and actually getting more people vaccinated, opening up vaccination sites, using it towards education on the vaccine so people are not hesitant to go and get it in a conservative state like Alabama, instead of doing any of these things, they're choosing to send this federal relief money to build new prisons. So listen, this is just one of those stories that is perfectly emblematic of where the United States is at right now, what our priorities as a country are. We don't care about solving this public health crisis, right? Globally or domestically. We know this because of how we have been handling the patents on the COVID vaccines, right? We are allowing these gigantic big pharma companies to profit to the tunes of billions of dollars, if not tens of billions of dollars every single year, as the rest of the world has essentially no access to these vaccines. We know that the world's poorest nations across the world have gotten roughly 2% of the total vaccine supply, and meanwhile we are about to be unloading our booster shots here in the United States. So it's a completely ridiculous situation that we have right now in terms of how we have been handling the COVID pandemic. We have like over 2,000 deaths per day recently, which is a 9/11 every day, because that's the framing that people typically like to go with that. But just a ridiculous amount of mass death that has become normalized and accepted in this country, and it's absolutely horrific to be tying that in with our mass incarceration state, right? Because again, as we were just pointing out there, we have more prisoners than anyone in the entire world. We have more COVID deaths than anyone in the entire world, and yet this is exactly how the Alabama governor, GOP governor, has decided to allocate these funds to exacerbate both of those problems.